Welcome to Sketch Club Episode 1. In this lesson, we'll explore the essentials of shading and light in art. We'll start by understanding what light and shadow mean in drawing, followed by real-world examples. I'll guide you through identifying the light source and breaking down the key parts of a shadow. Then we'll dive into a hands-on still life tutorial where you'll learn shading, highlighting, and texture techniques. You can recreate the still life in your space with any objects of your choice. This course is designed for all ages, and you have access for an entire year, so feel free to pause, replay, and revisit the material at any time. By the end of this lesson, you'll have a solid grasp of light and shadow in art, know how to create three-dimensional effects with shading, and discover some inspiring art history along the way. Shading in drawing is a technique used to add value. Artists use areas of light and dark to create the illusion of depth, form, and texture. By applying darker tones where the light is blocked or diminished, artists can create shadows, while lighter tones are used where the light hits directly. This interplay of light and shadow brings dimension and realism to your artwork, making flat images appear three-dimensional. On the right, you can see two sets of shapes. The top set is flat and two-dimensional. The second set is three-dimensional and has shadow and light, creating the illusion of depth. This is a flat circle with no shading or highlights. This is a sphere with shadow and highlights. Notice the light source. Directly below it is the highlight on the sphere. The next shades are the midtones, then the reflected light. The core shadows are darkest, and the cast shadows are last. There are several ways to create these tones of shadow and light, but this one was done using a digital pencil with gestural contour lines. You have reached the Sketch Club tutorial. If you are using traditional pencils and paper, please take a moment to set up your space with your materials in reach. If you are using a device, please make sure that your tablet is charged and your brushes are loaded. Having a routine for your art practice shows respect in the act of speaking the language of art, as well as setting the artist up for success with an organized space to work. When you are setting up your still life, make sure that you have the following things to create a successful experience. First thing you will need are objects for the still life setup. You can use traditional objects like fruits, apples, or grapes. You can use flowers, vases, bottles, jars, books, toys, anything that has a geometric shape. Or you can use a theme for your objects, such as kitchen still life using silverware and dishes, or an art supplies still life theme. Next, find a flat surface like a table to place your objects upon. Consider using a textured or wood table or a plain draped cloth for contrast. Position your still life near a window for soft, natural, and diffused light, or use a lamp or a direct light to control your shadows and highlights. Having the right tools before you begin ensures a smoother art-making process. If you're taking reference photos, have your camera ready. Keep a sketchbook nearby for testing media or quick sketches. For digital work, ensure your devices are charged and your brushes are preloaded in your drawing app. If you're in a busy space or want a backdrop, drape a large cloth behind your setup to create a clean environment. Finally, make sure your easel is sturdy, your stand is secure, and all props, including any fabrics for your still life, are arranged before you start. Now that we have all of our materials and our still life set up, let's focus on lighting and how to capture it in your drawing. Take a moment to observe how the light interacts with your objects and notice where it is brightest and where the shadows deepen. The farther away from the light source, the darker it is on the shape. Can you identify the highlights, the midtones, the core shadow, and the cast shadow on the materials of your still life? So how do we draw shadows and highlights to create depth? When you begin your drawing, adjust your pencil pressure to reflect the light in dark areas by pressing harder to create dense, dark lines where the shadows fall, and lightening your touch where the light hits to capture the highlights. This technique will help you render the full range of values, highlights, shadows, and midtones, bringing depth and realism to your still life. Start with soft gestural lines, quick and fluid, using your whole arm rather than tight, detailed marks. As you glance between the still life and your drawing, note the darker areas and build up more marks to define the midtones. Gradually, as you work toward the core shadows, your lines will become the darkest, representing the deepest areas of the shadow. The cast shadow, meanwhile, should be softer with a smudged midtone that spreads more broadly. Now that you've learned the basics of drawing a still life, you can practice with different objects, lighting variations, and new drawing techniques. Let's explore ways to integrate value, light, and shadow using mark making and lines. The techniques we'll focus on are hatching, cross-hatching, tonal, stipple, scumble, and smudge. Hatching involves drawing parallel lines to build up shading and texture. Cross-hatching adds another layer of lines in the opposite direction, creating deeper values. The tonal technique uses smooth shading without visible lines, creating a soft transition between light and dark. Stippling uses tiny dots to form shadows and textures, with closer dots making darker areas. Scumbling involves loose, scribbled lines for a rough, textured effect. Finally, smudging blends pencil marks for a smooth, gradual transition between values. Take time to practice the observation and drawing techniques you've learned in this episode on shadow and light. Challenge yourself with new still life subjects, themes, or even mixed media. Up next, we'll explore the work of Vija Celmins, an artist renowned for her astonishingly realistic drawings. Vija Celmins, a Latvian-American artist, is celebrated for her hyper-realistic graphite drawings that turn ordinary subjects into profound meditations on texture, light, and depth. In her piece untitled Big C No. 1, Celmins employs a refined technique of layering graphite to create intricate tonal gradations which allow her to capture the shifting surface of the ocean. By meticulously controlling the pressure and density of her pencil strokes, she generates a striking interplay of shadow and light, bright highlights on the wave crests, and deep shadows in the troughs. This nuanced use of tonal variation creates a sense of depth and movement, effectively transforming the flat surface of the paper into the illusion of a three-dimensional seascape. Her attention to detail and mastery of light and shadow imbue the drawing with an extraordinary sense of realism, making the viewer feel as though they are looking into the endless expanse of the sea. You have reached the end of this episode. Thank you for joining me on this journey through light and shadow in art and drawing. In the next lesson, we'll dive into 1 and 2 point perspective, perfect for those interested in landscapes or architecture. We'll also explore sketches from the Renaissance in our art history segment. Be sure to join us for episode 2.